The New Gate, an acclaimed next-generation MMORPG, where groundbreaking technology allows players to explore a vast world as if it were real. Choosing between races like human, elf, beast, dragoner, pixie, dwarf, or lord, players can join friends in an adventure where you can defeat powerful creatures, amass endless fortunes through trade, or become a blacksmith and craft legendary weapons. Whatever it is, everything you imagine is within reach in the New Gate, an MMORPG available worldwide. However, despite the tempting promise, one day the New Gate became a literally deadly game, and since then, it has been impossible to exit the game, and dying inside meant dying for real in the real world. Shin, the most powerful player in this RPG, managed to ensure his survival through his vast skill, hoping to one day end this macabre game. Accompanied by his group of 3 other players, Shin explores the 4 corners of this virtual world and faces increasingly dangerous bosses determined to end the lives of humans trapped in this place. On one of these adventure days, Shin encountered Origin, the Gate Guardian, and even after cutting the monster's wings, it fully recovered. Focusing on preventing this regeneration, the warrior uses his steel attack to shake the opponent, gaining room to deliver several blows that almost guaranteed victory, but Origin continues to heal. Soon the human uses the Moonblade dance to turn his sword into an unparalleled source of power. Then he hits the creature one last time and defeats Origin, the Gate Guardian. With victory, Shin achieved the titles Limit Breaker, the Achiever, and the Liberator, and gained the chance to log out of the game. Checking his friends list, he sees that all of his friends were finally leaving the game one by one until he was the last one left and bid farewell to New Gate. But just as he was about to exit the game, a gate opens in front of him, throwing the boy into an unknown place. Upon touching a pedal, he notices that this place seems too real to be virtual, even with the advancement of VR technology. Looking at his attributes, he discovers that all are above 2,000, even though the limit is 999. Still, he couldn't wait to leave. The logout button had disappeared from the menu. Upon seeing if his friends had to return, the boy realizes that he doesn't even have an internet connection. So that world was indeed real. Faced with this, the boy has a brief freakout, but quickly composes himself to resolve the situation. Shin's first move is to use his item that takes him to where his base was registered, and following the path indicated by the magic bird, he finds walls of a city he had never seen. Still, he manages to find his house after a long time, and there was an elf in trouble because some thugs were after her master. To extract information, they take the elf away, but a giant wild boar emerges from the forest and sends the men running. When the beast was about to finish off the elf, Shin destroys the creature and realizes with this that he is capable of adjusting the power of the spells he wants to use, and apparently the weight of the physical attack returns to him. Later, the elf thanks him for being saved and introduces herself as Tira Lucent. Her master, whom those men were after, is called Schnee Razor, and she is the sub-manager of the Moon Sanctuary. Soon, Shin remembers this elf with waist-length silver hair because she is one of the members of his old group. After reflecting that the Moon Sanctuary is present in this world, Shin asks where Schnee could be, but the servant is not willing to reveal the mistress's location, as she barely knows the man in front of her. However, as she is responsible for taking care of the shop and delivering messages to the mistress, Tira allows Shin to deliver one of these messages to Schnee, and each of them costs 1,000 jewels. However, the boy has no idea what money this is, and he only has Joss in hand. Tira questions if he took it from some item box because only a few royals and elders are capable of using this type of box. Furthermore, Jaw coins have the power to invoke spells, making them worth about 100 million jewels. Ironically, Shin remembers that inside the game, a Jaw is like having a penny. Curious, Tira asks who the boy is, and he responds that he is just an adventurer, and according to the settings, his race is a superior human. Tira replies that the superior humans were extinct, leaving only the common ones. According to what she heard, only 6 superior humans existed, and they have been missing since the day of the decline of glory, 500 years ago, a historical event that caused the mass disappearance of countless beings. At that moment, Shin remembers that after defeating Origin, the names on his player list disappeared, and if a number of that scale disappeared, then that is a significant incident. Connecting the dots, the warrior discovers that this world is that world after passing 500 years. After that, Shin offers a Jaw coin to the girl as a sign of friendship, and the elf admires the wonderful design of the coin she so desired, while Shin ends up analyzing the wonderful design of other things that interest him. Then he comments that such a coin could be useful for the elf as this race uses a lot of magic. Tira discovers that her mistress changed her appearance with illusionary magic because black-haired elves are symbols of bad luck. This hair color is famous for attracting tragedies like the men who attacked her moments ago. Because of this misfortune, Tira was expelled from her village until Schnee rescued her. So the mistress placed a mystical barrier around this shop, making Tyra live safely for the last 100 years. When he asks her about it, Shin finds out that before the curse, the girl's hair was silver. So he remembers hearing about a spell called Cursed Gift. Fortunately for the elf, Shin has the ability to purify. But even though the spell worked, nothing changed in the girl's appearance except for a strand of silver hair. Faced with this, Tyra is extremely happy because she loves seeing her original hair after 100 years. Next, Shin calls the elf to cross the mystical barrier and promises to eliminate any threat that may arise. Thus, she finally manages to surpass that limit and walk freely into the forest until she reaches the beautiful view of a field and cries before the immensity of the sky. Back at the Moon's Sanctuary, Shin announces that he will visit the next city in search of his lost companions. Since the neighboring city is the kingdom of Barilich, Tara hands him a letter of recommendation that will allow Shin to bypass the inspection queue there. Before the departure of the superior human, the elf promises to notify when Shni returns, and after passing through the huge inspection queue, he sees that the letter is indeed very useful. Walking through the streets of the kingdom known as Bay, Shin is taken to the Adventurers Guild, an excellent place to gather information. Inside, he asks to register as an adventurer, and the attendant asks him to go up the left stairs and follow to the counter. Upon doing exactly that, Shin comes across an attendant identical to the other, then discovers that the girl downstairs is the older twin sister of this one, and her name is Celica. The girl downstairs is now called Silica. She informs Shin that he must pay the initial fee and fill out the paperwork. Unfortunately, the guild card will only be ready the next day, so the warrior uses the time to analyze his surroundings and notice that there are many iron and copper weapons in the guild, so the overall game quality was better before. At that moment, Celica arrives to serve the dish that the newest adventurer ordered, but when he puts the food in his mouth, he comments that it's hard to eat with someone staring directly at his face. However, the girl was there to check if the Moon Sanctuary's recommendation letter was really authentic. Shin doesn't mind going through this inspection, but he would love to finish eating before going, even to avoid meeting the guild master right away. However, it seems that the master was right behind the guy, and he was the one in front of him at the first guild counter. Thus, the man introduces himself as Barlux, and getting straight to the point, he asks Shin to show the recommendation letter he received. To check if it is indeed original, Barlux places an authentic letter next to it, and as both shine, the adventurer's is not fake. Soon, Shin informs that it was Tira who gave him the letter, so the guild master explains some instructions that the elf should have passed when delivering this item. Barlux explains that with this letter, it is possible to enter almost any country without having to go through inspection. It is accepted in all guilds, and in the case of this kingdom, it allows scheduling an audience with the king. To have such a valuable item in hand, many steal or even kill to achieve their evil goals. So Shin must assure the master that he can protect this letter, otherwise it will have to be destroyed right now. Shin promises to take care of the gift given by Tira to honor the elf's name. That said, Barlux stands up to greet the young man and states having great expectations for him, but before leaving, Shin needs to have his skills tested right there. At the end of the day, the warrior is exhausted from all the hustle and bustle, so he plans to increase his rank as soon as he receives the guild card. The next day, he wakes up exactly where he was, so he realizes that he really wasn't in a nightmare. Returning to the guild, Shin thanks Celica for the recommendation, and the girl notices the boy's new clothes. He says that with them, he feels more free to move. However, he knows that a lower-level adventurer should not walk with that flashy equipment before. So the attendant hands the card to the adventurer and warns that there are 9 adventurer ranks, SSS, and from A to G completing jobs gives points to rank up, and adventurers can accept jobs up to 2 ranks above theirs. Soon Shin says he will do a mission to gather Hilk's grass, a famous potion ingredient, so he says goodbye and leaves. As the boy walked away, Celica observes that he doesn't seem very imposing, even though Barlux recognized him for his ability. Sometime later, Shin has been searching for Hilk's grass for 3 hours, until he identifies a monster moving strangely on the radar. In search of the monster, Shin spots a Skullfist Jack, a level 359 monster. Upon seeing a nearby destroyed carriage, the adventurer notices that the strange movement of the creature was because it was fighting. Remembering the adventurers in the guild talking about a Skullfist Jack making several victims in the vicinity, Shin decides to put an end to the monster once and for all, but the opponent's strength and speed indicate that this will not be an easy challenge. Interestingly, the creature was an undead carrying a light element sword, and Shin had never seen that before. Upon attacking again, the human fails to cause significant damage to the enemy, and his sword shouldn't withstand many more blows. Therefore, Shin decides to test his limit break skill, to then invest against the Skullfist Jack and destroy its heart. However, the boy laments that the skeleton's sword flew away and couldn't grab it, but at least there was a precious loot gemstone. With it in hand, Shin begins to believe that this real world is much more fun than he imagined, while the sword spins until it pierces the window of a woman named Ryan. After inspecting the sword, the soldiers inquire about what to do with it. Then the leader requests the presence of an appraiser to determine the weapon's composition and uncover who threw it into the castle. Speaking to herself, Ryan is certain that this sword belongs to someone very powerful. Upon returning to the city, Shin sees adventurers seriously injured. He questions a soldier about what happened. The man explains that everyone fell victim to skullfish in the northern forest, and only 4 out of the 12 sent survived. Shin recalls the corpses he found at that location. Additionally, the man mentions a sword seen flying through the forest until it collided with the castle. He then asks Shin if he knows anything about it, but Shin pretends not to. The man informs Shin that he's investigating the case and asks for information if Shin discovers anything. Back at the guild, Shin introduces himself to Celica to file a report. With the threat of Skullfish Jack, a high-priority extermination request was issued to hunt down this monster. Shin displays the precious stone he collected from the skeleton after defeating it. Celica is astonished and can't believe that this guy alone took down such a bizarre monster. Despite asking the girl to calm down, Shin ends up liking her firm and frightened demeanor. At that moment, an elf named Els approaches the conversation. Celica tells her co-worker that this guy defeated Skullfish Jack. Shin claims he can't prove it because he didn't bring the monster's equipment since it wasn't anything special. However, Els points out that Jack's equipment can only be obtained by someone ranked B or with a small fortune, so it's strange for a rookie adventurer to say that. Anyway, they decide to examine the precious stone to see if it contains the skeleton's mana. According to Els, this type of monster arises when the grievances or attachments of the dead merge with mana. Despite the forests of the north being very dangerous, many lose their lives there. Still, the mana of that region is weak, so it shouldn't create such strong monsters. Shin finds it strange for a level 359 creature to appear in that area, so the women become alert to the magnitude of this threat looming over the kingdom. Celica takes the precious stone to determine the monster's strength, while Els is sure that only a rank A could defeat an enemy of that caliber. Shin asks the elf to keep it a secret because the last thing he wants is to attract After that, Shin takes a break to grab something to eat. Celica's twin sister, accompanies the boy to an empty table. She serves the requested drink and asks if it's okay to share the table with someone. Suddenly, a shadowy figure crosses the guild, drawing everyone's attention and startling the present adventurers. This individual carries the magical spear Venom, a legendary weapon capable of rivaling mythological weapons. He sits down and introduces himself as Wilhelm Avis, and Shin notices he's a level 188 Lancer. Avis comments that the boy has good equipment despite being a rookie. Shin explains that he comes from the countryside and is unfamiliar with big city habits. Avis understands why the boy wasn't startled by his name. After all, he's called Vampire because he hunts many undead. Shin thought this nickname was due to the Lancer's paleness, which makes everyone in the guild question the newbie's sanity. Avis finds the boy's oddity amusing and reveals that the nickname comes from the spear's draining ability, which consumes the victim's life force and transfers it to the user. At that moment, Celica arrives to serve the 2 dishes, and both warriors agree that eating is better than talking. After lunch, Shin steps into a library for the first time in a while. He spends the afternoon reading about the history of the Kingdom of Barilich, founded 511 years ago. He recalls Tira saying that the decline of glory happened 500 years ago, an event where several people disappeared. Shin thinks that players disappearing when they log out of the game might be the cause of this confusion. Then he finds a book about the races of this world and notices that they are the same as those in the game. Meanwhile, Barlux leads a meeting about Skullfish Jack's death. A knight questions why the executor didn't take the monster's equipment. Els explains that the adventurer didn't see anything special in the weapons. An old man comments that those who receive the letter of recommendation are usually not normal, and Barlux disagrees as he also received one. Anyway, the evaluation of the stone confirmed Skullfish is level 359, elevating him to king level, so it's worrisome to think that there might be monsters of that caliber in the northern forest. Therefore, the knight would like to know more about the equipment Skullfish carried and about who defeated him. Barlux recalls that the executor wanted to remain anonymous, but as for the skeleton's weapons, the knight mentions that the sword that flew into the castle appeared on the same day Skullfish was defeated. The sword's blade is about 7 feet long, made of a magical steel and mithril alloy, and enchanted with a light element spell. In other words, it's a weapon comparable to the treasure sword of the nation of Barilich, and since it's probably a legendary equipment, it wouldn't be wise to ignore someone who defeated the wielder of such a weapon. Moreover, there's a big problem with this whole story. Meanwhile, Shin enjoys some cat barbecue in the square until a tiger girl from the beast folk approaches. Shin offers her a skewer, and the girl takes it without ceremony. After eating, she gains confidence to introduce herself as Millie, so Shin also says his name and asks if she has someone to take her home. At that moment, she points to Wilhelm, who appears for an unexpected reunion. Shin thought she was the Lancer's daughter, but he explains that she's one of the children from the church orphanage, and since Millie is quite naughty and tends to run away, he often has to go after her. Anyway, Wilhelm comments that Millie is very shy, so he's surprised that she interacted with the boy. Speaking of which, the girl approaches and asks the young man to save a fox in the northern forest before leaving. As Shin settles into his quarters, he ponders why Millie asked him to save the fox, but with nothing else to do until Schnee shows up, he decides to take a look into the matter. Speaking of which, he has a way to get in touch with Tira's master, so the next day he heads straight for the Moon Shrine. Upon arrival, he asks the elf to send a message to Schnee asking her to meet him if she recognizes the sword he's holding. Tira is impressed by the ancient-level weapon, so Shin explains that its name is Blue Moon and it belongs to Schnee, and can only be used by her or him, their creators, as well as those designated by the two of them. Although it appears powerful, Tara believes that wielding this sword would consume her, and Shin thinks it's because of the material the weapon is made of. After all, it's crafted from a chimera alloy, a fang from the Black Death Dragon, a scale from the Ocean Rebellion beast, and a tear from an elemental. In light of this, Tara remarks that nothing can scare her anymore when Shin shows up with all these stories, so Shin apologizes but emphasizes that the Blue Moon is the only way for Schnee to remember him. Thus, Tira agrees to help, and the adventurer hands her a magical letter that will reach him no matter where he is. Tara is to send it to Shin if she hears any news from her master, simply by writing the recipient's name and saying the word send. Tara asks why the boy doesn't send this letter directly to Schnee, and he explains that he's tried, but it never worked. Because of this, he ends up having to prove to Tira that these letters work, so he leaves the shrine, and the letter immediately arrives for the elf after he sends it. The thing is, for some reason, these letters can't be sent to Schnee, maybe because he hasn't met her yet in this world. Impressed, Tara asks for some of these letters for herself, so Shin takes advantage of having several leftovers and gives her some. Since she's studying magic, the elf would like to study this magical item, so Shin gives her 3 of them to cover the shipping cost he asked for. After the adventurer leaves, Tara wonders why she doesn't send them directly to her master, since she knows her in this world. Sometime later, Shin arrives in the northern forest in search of the fox, but a frightening voice tells the boy to leave. He knows it's a magical barrier spell, but as he's resistant to mental interference, Shin can't be affected by this spell, although it's still a sign that something is coming. As he advances deeper into the forest, Shin discovers a huge staircase with a bird's perch at the top, and at the end of it, he finds a shrine. As soon as he arrives there, the dark voice of the forest disappears, so he believes that this is the center of the barrier. Just as he crosses the bird's perch, a strange snapping sound occurs, and as soon as he enters the shrine, he sees the fox lying in the center of a ritualistic symbol. Shin approaches and realizes that the fox cub is poisoned and cursed, so he hurries to prevent the animal's death. Shin is relieved to heal the animal but becomes alert upon hearing a strange noise. His radar indicates the approach of a horde of enemies, who are undead skeletons equipped with weapons. It's a large number of enemies, so Shin summons a spear with one hand while holding the fox with the other. As the enemy army advances, the adventurer conjures the piercing groove to destroy half of the opponents, and then uses his shining flower to defeat the rest of the skeletons. Still, his radar identified 2 enemies right ahead that Shin hadn't seen, so the 2 Kitsune fox statues break and reveal 2 invaded golems at level 674. The blue fox attacks with ice magic, while the red one masters the art of fire. The dark mist in this part of the forest acted as a miasma that produced these aberrations, and Shin has no choice but to get rid of them. Using the shadow bonds, he traps the golems, but they release miasma from their bodies until it forms a smokescreen that affects the fox. Soon, the beasts had broken free from the bonds and were attacking the adventurer, who could barely see the enemies in the midst of the mist. However, the fox points to the magic circle where it was, and running to the center of it, Shin discovers that the mist doesn't invade this symbol, besides revealing the location of the enemies. As the monsters advance once again, Shin summons the Arch of Bonds to trap them, while ending the fight with a cataclysmic strike. The death of the creatures dispelled the mist, so the fox jumps on the human who saved it. Upon analyzing the animal, Shin discovers that it is a level 211 elemental, one of the most powerful monsters in the NU Gate, but it should look like a humanoid or a giant fox instead of a small cub. Either way, Shin takes the opportunity to adopt the little fox, which is already glued to him in gratitude. With a new pet on his head, Shin reflects that he had never seen miasma-affected golems and a cub elemental in the game and hopes that this could be a clue on how to return to his world. Meanwhile, Shni receives a magical letter at the request of her master. This master, relieved that the little fox wasn't using its claws while tapping on his head, observes that he's never seen so many skullfuses together. Therefore, he thinks he should report to the guild, but without mentioning the elemental for now. Thus, Shin proposed a partnership with a little creature, where the human would be its trainer and companion, keeping the level and species of the animal hidden so they can be together all the time. With the fox's enthusiastic response, Shin presumes she agreed, so he recites the enchantment words affirming his desire to always walk with the elemental, and a mark of unity is born on their bodies. After sealing the pact, now it's time to decide a name for his new friend, and suggesting Yuzuha, he gives the boy more pats on the head as a way of agreeing. Next, the adventurer receives a message from Tyra saying she already sent a message to Shni, so Shin remembers that the elf could do that without any problem, deciding to return with Yuzuha to the guild at that moment. Arriving there, he looks for someone to assist him, and it seems like the twins Celica and Silica are competing to have that honor. The older one argues that the adventurer is standing right in front of her, so she should take care of his report. On the other hand, the younger one replies that it's not typical of her sister, but decides to step aside. Meanwhile, Shin asks again if they're going to proceed with the report, so finally Celica attends to him. After that, the young man takes the opportunity to take a look at other jobs, and in one of them, someone was looking for a successor for the church orphanage's ability. Since it's an unranked service, the boy becomes curious about what might be at stake, and since he already had the desire to visit Millie at the orphanage, he decides to take the job and leave. Upon arriving at the West Wing Church, Shin is impressed by the beauty of the place, and when approached, he explains to the woman who receives him that he came for the requested job and also wants to see Millie. The woman seems suspicious of the adventurer's intentions, but decides to trust him and brings the beastfolk girl. With the girl's affectionate reception of the boy, the woman lowers her guard and introduces herself as Tria, a nun of that church, confessing that she feels happy for Millie to become attached to someone. Speaking of Millie, the girl thanks Shin for rescuing the fox, so he introduces Yuzuha to the beastfolk girl and explains that this little girl was responsible for triggering his rescue. Soon, Tria explains that she's looking for someone with a specific ability to be taught in the church, and because of the nature of the nun's service, Shin presumes it has to do with healing wounds, but in fact, Tria is looking for the purification ability. Although it's rare, the adventurer confirms he possesses this power, but warns that it depends solely on the nun to seal the deal. The woman believes that the boy will ask for a high sum because of the rarity of this technique, but he only wants to know about Millie's power and any information the church has acquired. Trey hesitates for a moment as she's dealing with a stranger, but the adventurer needs to find out more about this world he's living in, and the church would be a great source of information. At this moment, Millie gives the nun a deep look and asserts that Shin won't cause trouble, so the employee accepts the proposal even though she doesn't believe she can help much. However, Shin would like to know if Tria knows anyone who comes to the church saying things that catch her attention, besides revealing Millie's power. Firstly, the woman informs that Millie holds the title of Star Composer for having visions of the future that always come true. Shin emphasizes that people with bad intentions could use this child for evil purposes, but that's why Tria always asked people who knew not to share this information with anyone. Moreover, she mentions that an adventurer, who was an orphan in that church, Wilhelm Evis, helps a lot in the cause by scaring anyone who thinks of bringing harm to the children there. Therefore, Shin accepts the job, so Tria informs that she would like the granddaughter of a former priest to learn purification because things would be calmer if she inherited the church, and this final information made Shin realize that the situation is complicated there. In the church courtyard, the children gather around Yuzuha to cuddle the fox, who feels so at home in the hands of the kids that Shin can't help but feel a pang of jealousy seeing that situation. By the way, he asks if Millie also wants to pet the little animal, but soon realizes she's too small to do so. Speaking of small creatures, Yuzuha gets tired of the cuddles and returns to her owner's head, and shortly after, Millie calls the fox and keeps her all to herself, declaring that it was the plan from the beginning, which scares not only Shin, but also the children who run away upon hearing this bizarre statement. At that moment, the boy meets another nun, and she explains that unfortunately, the orphanage is about to be closed because the church is without a priest at the moment and would need another to assume that position. Tria could be that person, but to reach that position, the candidate needs to be able to emanate a special ability, like the purification mentioned by the nun. To make matters worse, there's a candidate for the new priest who wants to get rid of the orphanage because he's nothing but a greedy pig, but Tria says that Laisha, the former priest's granddaughter, may have the right to inherit the church if she develops this special ability, which would prevent the entire place from falling into the hands of that greedy man. Millie has no doubt that Shin will take care of all this for them, and the nun responds that just as she knows where every sandwich is hidden in the orphanage, Millie could be right about this, so Shin realizes that not everyone knows that the girl is the star composer. Later, when Tria comes to call the adventurer in the courtyard to meet the former priest's granddaughter, all the kids were sleeping in the boy's lap, who also doesn't know how he ended up there. Soon he finds himself facing Leisha, who, when introducing herself, stumbles over her words. Tria emphasizes that the young woman, despite being dedicated, can be a bit careless at times, so Shin also states his name and asserts that he will be responsible for teaching purification to Leisha, who confirms her enthusiasm for the task. However, before anything else, Shin asks if anyone knows where a large number of high-level undead appear around there, and Wilhelm shows up when Tria responds that they are common in the ghost plane. The spearman, upon discovering everything that's going on, questions if perhaps the sisters are trusting the stranger too much, but Tria argues that Millie clearly said the guy won't be a problem. Wilhelm asks if the girl saw anything, and she replies that she did. Therefore, the spearman trusts the child's vision, but warns that at any sign of betrayal from this adventurer, he will use his lance to roast Shin on a spit. Millie and the sisters disapprove of the experienced adventurer's short fuse, who, proving the women's point, impatiently questions about this so-called purification. So finally, Shin reveals that, to develop this ability, one must defeat 200 undead above level 150 while holding an item called the Sacred Prayer Orb. However, considering that the final blow counts as a death, Shin will beat up everyone so Leisha can finish the job. As for the orb, it's quite hard to come by, but fortunately, the guy already has one. Hearing that, Tria finds it curious that the young man is saying so many things like it's a walk in the park, so he makes a point to ask Sister Leisha herself if she can handle the deal. Since the poor thing got a blue screen, Wilhelm shouts, bringing her back to life and agreeing with everything. Then the spearman announces he's going with them, while Tria relies on her companion for this purpose. In the meantime, Wilhelm Avis reflects that there can only be one explanation for this newcomer's guarantee that he'll exterminate a horde of level 150 monsters. After the meeting, the supposed newcomer tells Yuzuha they're leaving tomorrow morning, while Wilhelm shows up to confirm something important with the boy. Taking the boy to a bar, he asks if Shin is a chosen one, but he has no idea what that is. So the spearman explains that they're people who are reborn with abilities and titles they shouldn't have, as well as information about items and monsters, even if the person has no memories of their previous life. Confused, Shin reflects that he was reborn in the game, but didn't reincarnate in this world as a baby, and superior humans have been extinct, but Wilhelm makes it clear that his intention is not to force the kid to say everything. With that, Shin finds it strange that people are afraid of this guy, considering he's even too attentive, so the spearman explains that that's the impression people have of him, whether he likes it or not. But to play the villain, he claims he's only helping the orphanage because the children's crying annoys him every time that greedy guy messes with them, so Shin spits out his drink and emphasizes that he knew this crazy guy was actually cool. When the man gets angry to maintain the villainous pose, Shin asks him to wait because he received a message. It was Tyra informing that Shni said she'll be back as soon as she finishes the job and asks Shin to inform if he leaves Barilich. As a final note, she asks what the kid did to make her master ask so many questions about him, and after reading the message, the adventurer presses a button on the flashing menu. Wilhelm explains that the acquired item is a recommendation letter from the Moon's Sanctuary, something he also has. The next day, the group arrives at the ghost plane and Leisha is visibly scared by the responsibility she has with the church. Shin hands over the Sacred Prayer Orb to her, leaving the young woman even more dumbfounded as she thanks him. As they advance through the plane, some undead appear accompanied by biohounds and advance towards the humans. Shin responds with a unique ablution, and by imprisoning the beasts with his magic, he orders the nun to take action. Then she points the scepter at the wolves and uses her healing spell, which has the opposite effect on the undead and vaporizes them. As for the skeletons, Wilhelm removes their limbs with the ability Light Flower to leave them vulnerable for the sister. So as the enemies kept coming, the adventurers dropped them all to the ground for her to accumulate the necessary kills. Over time, they advanced to a part of the ghost plane where there was a magical seal created by the guild to repel higher-level undead, so the group crosses the barrier to proceed with the mission. Further ahead, they track raptors and jumpkins nearby, so Wilhelm takes care of the front enemies, while Shin handles the left flank. Yuzuha, on the other hand, must take care of Sister Leisha. Soon, a standard strategy starts working again, and the nun continues to collect kills and level up in a frightening way, because the difference in strength between her and the monsters is very large. At this point, Wilhelm brings her such a battered creature that the production had to censor the image. Somewhere nearby, after learning about the presence of Skulfus's Jack in the ghost plane, Rion uses the giant sword that invaded her room to exterminate the enemy horde. A soldier expresses his concern about the other group of the expedition, but an elf asks the chief to leave it to her. Upon arriving at the troubled team, everyone was weakened and hopeless of defeating an enemy of that caliber, but the elf advances against the skullface and breaks its core with a barrage of lethal blows. Astonished, all the warriors look directly at their savior, the powerful Schnee. So the elf uses her wide healing to regenerate all the soldiers affected by Skullfist Jack, and they all feel relief as they gain a new lease on life. The unit commander thanks her for the help and confesses that he thought they would need to retreat. Schnee demonstrates humility by responding that she only managed to defeat the enemy because he was already weakened by the soldiers. The commander emphasizes that the elf's words fill him with honor, but laments that these undead should not be appearing because they truly should not appear on the Phantom Plane. The kingdom of Barilich even sent elite troops to contain the threat, but it was the elf who single-handedly dealt with the opponent that an entire squadron couldn't, although it's something expected of a being who has been alongside superior humans. However, and according to the reports, this was the last irregular creature in the perimeter, so possibly the problem is over. Nonetheless, Schnee will continue investigating the area and instructs the commander to use the magical item she gave him if something goes wrong. Thus, as she returns to her mission, Schnee rejoices in finally being able to see her master again as she heads in his direction. Nearby, Shin's group continues their mission to obtain the purification ability for Leisha. Wilhelm faces another Skullfist Jack, and as he charges at him using his incredible speed, the Venom Magic Lance takes care of the job and easily destroys the enemy. Seeing that Leisha was frozen in fear, he instructs her to finish the job, which she hurries to do as she returns to herself. Approaching the skullface and unleashing the healing, the green magical energy being emitted turns golden, worrying the group, but Shin reassures everyone by explaining that this effect occurs when you meet the conditions to learn a new ability. Seeing the nun with a strange expression, Wilhelm asks if she's okay, and she explains that her mind was flooded with thoughts on how to use this ability. Thus, Shin and Yuzuha congratulate Leisha on learning purification, and the nun is happy to be able to save the orphanage after all this effort. Therefore, Shin suggests a break before they return to Barilich later. However, a huge dark mass of magic emerges, covering the skies toward a gigantic sphere, accumulating all that energy. According to Wilhelm, this is the magical matter that animates the undead, while Leisha admires its beauty. The Lancer explains that it's necessary to drain this matter to prevent the monsters from maintaining their form by defeating them all, but a portion of that matter descends and forms a colossal monster on the ground, leaving Leisha incredulous at its size. Analyzing the creature, Shin sees that it's the Skullfist Lord, level 804, with such insane HP that it's not possible to identify the quantity. Leisha believes that a monster like this could devastate an entire nation, so she asks Shin if the magic barrier is enough to stop such an enemy. The adventurer isn't sure in the face of that opponent's power. Suddenly, the Skullfist Lord flies toward the sky and breaks the barrier with just one punch, providing an immediate answer to the nun's doubt, who can barely stand in the face of such tremendous force. Shin and Wilhelm look at each other and sweat profusely as they notice the Lord looking in their direction, so the group decides to flee without a second thought. However, a horde of skeletons surrounds the team and prevents their escape, and the Lancer considers making a gap in the horde to flee, but Shin is determined to stay and allow the others to leave. Wilhelm asks if the guy wants to die, but the warrior's response is to deactivate his mana limit, unleashing a terrifying energy from his body. According to Shin, once the barrier is broken, he can't simply ignore the monsters and let them leave as they please, endangering all the people outside. Feeling the boy's strength, Will asks to ease after all, but Shin ignores him with a laugh and asks the Lancer to take care of Leisha and Yuzuha, taking advantage of him being given an enhancement that allows Will to run faster to elude the enemies. Despite everything, Yuzuha refuses to leave her owner's side, so he decides to leave the fox where she is. Having done that, he conjures the lightning bunker, decimating the skeletons along the way and making space for the group to leave. With everything settled, Shin prepares for the confrontation against all, but it's Yuzuha who takes the initiative and destroys part of the enemy's front line with her Firefox ability. Despite the powerful spell, the Skullfist Lord lets out a roar that summons hundreds more skeletons to the battlefield, making Shin understand what he must do. So he invokes the Swallow's Flight Lightning Cut, causing a luminous explosion so large that Schnee could see and hear it from far away, thus discovering the path to her master. Still, the location is so filled with skeletons that Shin's map is completely red, and so he regrets not having Schnee to help at this moment. However, the blue marker for allies appears in the distance coming in his direction, so Shin decides to make a detour in the middle of the battle to find out who it is. Touching down in a flowery field, he comes across the presence of his apprentice, Shmi. Shin asks how she has been, but the skeletons don't give them a break and approach the two. To not spoil the mood, Yuzua creates a magical barrier to prevent the monsters from coming, so Shin returns to talk to his friend, but she surprises him with a strong hug before anything else. She asks if the master has something to say, and he thinks he needs to apologize for leaving her aside all this time, or thank her for taking care of the shop. But with each mistake the boy made, she squeezed him tighter with her hug. Therefore, Shin thinks more carefully about the next attempt until he remembers the moon shrine back when the elf took care of it. So he simply says he's back, prompting tears from his dear apprentice. Shinny thought her master would never return, and he reflects that finishing the death game should have erased his saved data, including the shrine, Shinny, and the other followers. It was then that Yuzua lost strength with the arrival of Skullfist Lord and let his barrier weaken. Shin comments to Shinny that it's better they deal with this beforehand, perhaps by launching a massive joint attack after so long. With that said, the two raise one hand and chant the sanctuary's enchantment, a large magic circle that sweeps away the darkness around and regenerates allied beings like the little elemental. The Lord is not defeated by the sanctuary, but weakened, so Shin draws his sword and cuts the monster in half until he breaks the magic stone in its heart. She approaches, but Shin tells her to stop where she is while listening to the Lord demand all that power for himself as the monster dies. Shin is astonished to see this monster speaking with his own eyes, and despite thinking that Skullfist Lord would be an opponent who would provide clues for him, unfortunately, nothing was discovered. At least it seems this haunted place will return to what it was before, so Shin takes the opportunity to have a peaceful conversation with the elf. Away from the field of flowers, Shin asks his friend if she remembers when he said goodbye to the others and went to defeat Origin. In his mind, everything should have ended after his victory, but there was a huge door in the dungeon boss's room, which opened as soon as Origin was defeated. As a result, Shin lost consciousness and woke up on a plane 500 years later. Saddened by his friend's absence all this time, Shinny shares that the dungeon disappeared without a trace, so she knew Shin had defeated Origin when other players claimed their masters had vanished. Shinny didn't understand why she hadn't disappeared along with them, so she started searching for Shin everywhere. However, the changes threw the continent into chaos and forced the group to work separately. Before anything else, Shin humbly asked his friend to stop calling him Master because she's so famous that everyone will be confused to see her calling an unknown boy that way. With that, Shinny becomes extremely embarrassed but gathers the courage to call her friend by his name, Shin, and the boy almost has a heart attack hearing that, although he pretends it was nothing. With that resolve, the adventurer plans to visit the sacred place he researched in the kingdom's library. Shinny reveals that she has been there before, but only for a superficial investigation. Seizing the opportunity, she asks apprehensively if Shin will leave forever when he finds a way out of there, and the boy answers yes without hesitation. Sad, the elf accepts the harsh answer, while Shin wonders how much she remembers when this world was a game. She remembers everything from the day they both descended to this land together. When they started calling it the Death Game, she became more self-aware because until then, it was as if she were viewing the situation from above, not from within it. With that, Shin discovers that the entire group knew they would disappear after leaving the game, so he apologizes for ignoring what they felt at the time. But Shinny thinks it was the right decision at that time because they weren't autonomous then, and wouldn't have been able to do much. Even if Shin knew they were conscious, it wouldn't have stopped him from fighting. Above all, as Shinny remembers, she and Shin have a promise together. Soon they end the sad conversation and plan a party when they return to the moon's sanctuary, and the elf takes the opportunity to ask who the little fox is. As soon as the boy says she's an elemental he has a partnership pact with, Shinny comments that she saw she wasn't a common spirit because of her tails. Not knowing what it's about, the adventurer lifts the fox, and now she has 3 tails. And as if that weren't enough, she wakes up saying good morning to Shin. The guy goes crazy and asks what's going on, so Yuzua explains that her mind cleared when that black thing disappeared. Shin thinks that maybe that lord was the master of the skeletons in that sanctuary. But anyway, he asks the fox not to speak in public to avoid confusion, and if possible, hide the other tails too. Impressing others with the power to merge tails, Yuzua asks if she's a good girl, and Shin responds lovingly. With that, Shinny can't resist the cuteness of the creature and asks to hold her while commenting that no one has ever tamed an elemental before, although Yuzua isn't as high level as the other they faced that day. With that said, the fox returns to Shin, and he decides to set out in search of the lost companions as soon as possible before the guild finds out about all this. Shinny comments that they could have left this conversation for later to speed things up, but Shin replies that he couldn't resist the elf's puppy dog eyes. Meanwhile, Wilhelm is still energetic with Leisha on his back, who asks if Shin will be okay. The adventurer emphasizes how strong the boy is until he feels something coming at great speed toward them. Will tells the nun to protect herself behind him while awaiting the arrival of the enemies. but it's just Shin and his companion, leaving the Lancer annoyed because of the scare. Later, Ryan and her expedition group investigate the rift caused by the battle between Shin and the Skullfist Lord. According to the officer, a group of skeletons emerged after that mysterious voice, then a light filled the sky and pulverized the enemies. Needing to find out who's responsible for this, Ryan's team finds Shin's sword stuck at the end of the fissure, suggesting that it was responsible for the rift. Furthermore, a subordinate reports knowing the blacksmith who marks his productions with the falcon symbol present on this sword. This professional is a superior human known as Blacksmith, the most skilled of his kind. Surprised, Ryan never imagined that superior humans still existed, and the soldier himself affirms that because of this, it's impossible to know if the blacksmith was the author of this weapon. Either way, they're dealing with someone crazy enough to discard a weapon like that as if it were nothing. Aware of this, Ryan questions Gadras if the blacksmith wasn't the owner of the Moon's sanctuary. After confirming, the officer questions what the commander is thinking of doing against a superior human. Without hesitation, Ryan replies that she would love to duel this being, and that he would probably make a great husband. Gadras advises the superior not to attack a superior human suddenly, but Ryan doesn't think she's careless to that extent. Meanwhile, Will is being hostile with Shin, wanting to know once and for all what this guy is. After all, now he even brought Shni Razor, who doesn't bow to anyone or join anyone. So Shin begins by saying that Shni defeated that lord, then Will points his spear at the boy's neck, because he doesn't believe it was her, since it was the adventurer who unleashed all that mana torrent and cast that flashy spell, and then still reached him and Laisha as if they were around the next corner. With no way out, Shin confesses that he is a superior human, and he's also Shni's master. As if that weren't enough, he admits that he was holding back his mana against the lord, so he didn't show everything he could. While Will is incredulous, Shin wants to know if there are still records of superior humans in this land, so the spearman says that few reports talk about how stupidly powerful and skilled they are, making some people even worship them as gods. About this, Shin believes that perhaps he doesn't lose to anyone as a blacksmith. Indeed, he asks with a mischievous expression that Will warn if his Venon spear isn't satisfying him someday. At that moment, Laisha wakes up somewhat frightened, thinking someone may have been injured amidst so many powerful monsters, but Will cynically says that Shin took care of everything. Shni introduces herself, and the nun then becomes enchanted, like a true fan in front of the idol. But soon after, she feels unwell after riding miles on Will's back at the speed of a Formula 1 car. Finally, Shin informs that he will separate from the spearman and the nun because the mission of teaching her the ability has been fulfilled. The protagonist gives one of those items that allows sending messages in Will's hand so he can warn if anything happens to the church. Will emphasizes that he would resort to anything if the situation demanded it, but he wouldn't want to involve outsiders in this problem. Anyway, Shin insists that he be called if the orphanage is in danger, because above all, he wants Will to be able to count on him in this matter. Thus, the spearman accepts the item and says goodbye to the adventurer. Shni comments that her master remains the same even though all this time has passed. Since always, Shin has never boasted of his supernatural strength, while always protecting the weaker ones. Later, upon arriving at the Moon's sanctuary, Shin smells something delicious. Just when hunger strikes, Shni had prepared dinner. Tira appears, receiving her master startled, as she wrote that letter to Shni, but it was a guy who came to her, saying he knows the master. Shni calms the elf and promises to tell everything during lunch, but Tyra questions if Shin will really eat with them. Seeing that her servant still doesn't know anything about the boy's life, the master tells her that he owns the Moon Sanctuary store. Tyra seems to understand fine at first, but soon those words hit her like a ton of bricks in her mind, and she questions what that is since the owner of the sanctuary is a legendary superior human. As mentioned, that's Shin. Accepting once and for all, Tyra apologizes for not knowing that before. As always, Shin shows humility and sees nothing wrong with it, especially because he prefers to skip those formalities. Tyra is afraid the guy will kick her out of the store, so Shin realizes he failed in the mission to show that he's not a deranged boss. Changing the subject, he takes the opportunity to introduce his elemental partner, Yuzuha. The fox warns that she's hungry, so the elf is even more surprised to see the animal speak. Next, everyone finally shares a meal, and Shin comments that indeed the ingredients he provided to the sanctuary had an effect. Shni agrees since the food even has a strange aura around it. Since the boy hadn't seen this, he thought better and remembered that the meats were cuts of thermal lion and orc king in addition to the fruits and topaz pear. That said, Tyra freaks out thinking that people use this kind of thing to make food, while Shni explains that this aura is the mana or life force of these ingredients, usually present in powerful monsters and rare plants. Tyra covers her ears so she doesn't have to hear these things, so Shni asks them to eat quickly before it gets cold. Soon Shin finds it strange that Tira also thanks for the food, and the elf says she only started doing that because the master does too. She started doing it because of her master in the same way. So finally, everyone eats the food after all this distraction. After dinner, Shin learns that the other supporting characters are living their own lives as they never had the certainty that Shin was still alive. Shin thinks this is great because he wouldn't want to see other people living to find him. She understands the feeling but emphasizes that if someone chose to look for the master above all else, it would be only a personal decision. Yuzuva asks if Shin is okay, and he replies that he's fine. Tara, on the other hand, can't say the same because she's already complaining that Shin worries too much about things. Then she waves to the two mistresses she's seen to her right, and as she's never seen Tira like this, Shin takes the elf to rest for a while. At bedtime, Shin notices his room hasn't changed at all since he left. Yuzuva is already asleep, so the boy gets ready to do the same. However, in no time, he wakes up feeling something heavy on top of him. At first, he thinks it's the fox, but she's in the corner of the bed. Then, feeling something soft, warm, and fragrant, he turns his head and sees Shni lying next to him, and he panics as the elf's melons were resting on the poor boy's shoulder. After the initial scare, Shin tries to call the girl, but she grabs his arm and lets out a tear. He doesn't know the reason for this brief cry, but for some reason, he apologizes to the elf. At dawn, Shin awakens and looks for Shni, then pulls some silver hair from under the blanket. However, upon seeing what it was actually Yuzuva, who had evolved into a more human version of herself. Since the girl was naked, Shin asks her to wear something before anything else, but the elemental doesn't understand the reason for this and innocently embraces the boy. For this reason, he gives her clothes that he made himself, and that normally the beings of her race wear when they turn human. At breakfast, Shin is surprised by the evolution of the elemental and compliments the beautiful red hakama she is wearing. Furthermore, now that she is human, the elf promises to set an extra plate at the table. After breakfast, Shin calls Yuzuva to ask a series of questions, taking advantage of the fact that she can now answer. First, he asks why she was in that sanctuary when he found her, and she explains that she suffered less there. Then the boy asks if she knows what symbols were those written on the ground, but she has no idea. After that, he wants to know if the fox knows anything about the many people who disappeared 500 years ago. Yuzuva explains that she didn't see many people in the sanctuary where she was, so she doesn't know about those things, as she was just taking a nap while sunbathing. Suddenly, the ground made noise, the wind, and the mountain too. Then she got scared, woke up, and held the ground so it wouldn't spoil. In other words, the elemental tried to prevent a natural disaster, and Shin knows that this race has the ability to do so. Finally, Yuzuva says she got hurt in the process and decided to rest in the sanctuary. She thought she was going to die until Shin came to save her life. Shin warns that it was thanks to Millie that he got there, so the fox promises to thank her friend when they see each other. Speaking of which, Shin takes the opportunity and invites everyone to visit the orphanage. So Shni suggests they bring kafals, a type of baked elven sweet that Tara makes and sells very well at the sanctuary. Shin casually mentions that the store's goal is not to sell food. She remembers that even if they wanted to restock, only the master can unlock the arsenal room. Having forgotten about this, the human realizes and promises to make some swords to restock the store. Furthermore, Shni also needs to talk to him about a very important issue, because she needs him to meet Gerard as soon as possible. Shin is surprised that the guy is still alive while remembering the farewell at the Moon's Sanctuary. After all, 500 years have passed since the decline of glory, and superior beasts like Gerard only live about 150 years. Speaking of which, Shni reveals that he doesn't have much time left and is certainly waiting for the master's arrival. She says Gerard joined the various tribes of beasts and formed the Farned Beast Alliance, being known by the Alliance as the first Beast King. Currently, the king is of the 8th generation and holds the military power and abilities of a leader, which allowed Gerard to wait for Shin in peace. Thus, the superior human decides to travel to his friend, but not before taking care of some pending matters, so they will leave tomorrow. Tira commits to continue taking care of the store, but her mistress would like her to go, because now that Shin is back, they don't need to worry about the Moon's Sanctuary anymore, because he will take the store along on this trip. So it would be good for Tira to accompany the group on the trip. Excited, Tara confirms that this is what she wants, so everyone should think about preparations like buying food and equipment. She asks to act independently for a while because she needs to report about the Skullfist to the kingdom, while Shin goes to the guild after making some swords, and while they are separated, he will look for a mission in the direction of Farned to rank up. Shni suggests they create a group to use voice chat, which is now known as telepathy. After doing so, she advises Tira to register as an adventurer, but the elf would like to find a more appropriate outfit before doing so. Arriving at the forge, Yuzuva is impressed, and Shin asks her not to touch anything because there are cursed weapons scattered around. Soon he returns to forging after so long and realizes that he knows exactly where to hammer out of pure intuition. In no time, the first sword was made, even though the human had unintentionally imbued magic into the weapon due to excitement, making the equipment of a higher level than any store could offer in the country. In the next attempt, he gets the hang of it and builds a small arsenal to restock the store. Having done that, Tara introduces herself to Shin, showing off her new outfit for the trip. The next day, the elf is so happy to finally be able to leave the store that she ends up enchanting Shin with her voluminous excitement. Then she asks what the boy thought of her excitement, and without thinking properly, he answers that indeed it is wonderful excitement. Acting naturally, Tara announces that they will get food and Shin will pay for everything as a punishment for having spied on a lady's excitement. Upon arriving in the city, Tara was impressed by the sheer number of people and asked if it was normal for this place to be so crowded, to which Shin replied that nowadays there were even fewer people. Seeing the elf overly excited, he joked that she should be careful not to get lost in all that enthusiasm, and the girl felt offended as if she were being treated like a child. Soon he warned her that first and foremost they should accomplish their tasks, and then they would have some time to wander around the city. So Tira pulled the boy by the arm towards the guild, and he chuckled, remembering that just a few days ago she was afraid to even leave the shop. However, despite pulling the boy along, the elf had no idea where the guild was, so he laughed and led her by the hand in the right direction. Hand in hand with the human, the girl felt embarrassed. Once at the guild, Shin saw his card indicate that he had moved from rank G to E, despite not having completed any jobs yet. Celica reminded him that he had defeated a high-level skullface and another horde of that race, and since the guild verified that this indeed happened, they decided to promote the adventurer. Celica mentioned that she would have promoted the boy straight to rank A, but according to him, the other adventurers wouldn't have liked that very much. Then the attendant asked about the relationship between the boy and the girl next to him, and he explained that they had decided to travel together by coincidence, and she came to register as a guild member. Without beating around the bush, Celica asked if she was Shin's girlfriend because she heard that the two were holding hands in the city. Cynically, she commented that one couldn't resist such a cute face, so Shin tried to change the subject and asked for some information about the sacred places said to have been destroyed during the decline of glory. Celica regretted that she couldn't provide any information about that to someone below rank B. Shin took it in stride and asked if there was any job he could do on the way to Farned, so the employee recommended an escort for a carriage to the Baron checkpoint, requested by someone named Nak. Shin and Tira had accepted the proposal, and Celica informed them that the convoy would depart this afternoon when the bell rang 3 times, and that 2 more adventurers would be part of this service. Therefore, they still had some time before the mission began, so Shin suggested a stroll through the city to the church. In the meantime, they took the opportunity to visit the shops and bakeries there, and Shin seemed happy to share this moment of fun with Tira. Upon reaching the church, they saw Laisha at the entrance, and Tira introduced herself as an employee of the Moon's Sanctuary. The nun was delighted with this detail and even more fascinated when she found out that the elf was an apprentice of Shni, wanting to know everything about the master's life as if she were a true fan. At the orphanage, Millie couldn't contain her happiness at seeing Yuzuha again after so long, and then they all thanked Shin for ensuring that the orphanage would not close, making Laisha the next priestess of the church. Shin asked where Wilhelm had gone, and they informed him that the spearman had gone after the other priest because the man wouldn't give up on reclaiming control of the church. Shin agreed with this investigation as no one yet knew the intentions of this priest. So he handed out items enchanted with various types of magic to the girls, such as a talisman. Then the other children from the orphanage arrived in the room upon hearing that Shin was back, so they all surrounded the adventurer to ask him to play with them. However, Tara didn't seem as comfortable as her friend, as the other children were grabbing her as if she were a toy. In parting, Laisha apologized to Tara for the commotion caused by the kids, but for the elf, it was nothing major, and she now knew how to deal with children, as she had never played with one before. Laisha commented that these children were wonderful, and that's why she would do whatever she could to protect this orphanage. But her speech was interrupted when she got her usual fit of rage. After a while, Tira's guild card was ready, so she was excited to see her rank key written on it. Then Shin announced that it was time to bring the Moon's Sanctuary with them, and Tira still didn't seem convinced that this was simply possible. On the other hand, the human owned the place, so it was common for him. Therefore, he showed a crystal that made Tira admire the quality of the cut, and this diamond was enchanted with the power of teleportation, being a consumable item that instantly takes you to a registered place, which they would use to reach the sanctuary. Tira emphasized how capable this guy was of pulling out all possible solutions from his pocket, even conjuring a lost magic like teleportation, but she presumed she should be used to it by now, considering Shin was a superior human. That said, Shin activated the teleportation, causing the two to fall into a spatial vortex and be taken to the moon's sanctuary. Once there, the boy wasted no time and used the store ability in the shop, and it disappeared, leaving Tira increasingly amazed. With that, Shin showed the sanctuary turning into an amulet when transport mode, and then they headed to their workplace. Approaching the convoy, he asked a Dragnir if that was Nak's carriage because they were the adventurers joining the journey for escort. Soon the Dragnir introduced himself as Gain, and the girl who emerged from the top of the carriage called herself Tsubaki. Then the merchant Nak arrived and thanked his protectors for accompanying him to Baryon, and with everyone aboard the carriage, the journey began. Meanwhile, at Barrelage Castle, the king was informed that the moon's sanctuary had disappeared, and the sovereign lamented that they had lost its structure and survived the decline of glory, which even the most powerful beings couldn't invade because of the mystical aura of the shop and its lost technology. The princess asked if anyone knew the whereabouts of Shinny Razor, and an informant reported that she was heading to the castle at this moment and should arrive later today. On the other hand, the princess pointed out that Ryan had not yet returned, so they didn't have enough information to decide what to do, so the most sensible thing would be to wait for Shinny's arrival, which her father agreed to. Returning to the escort, Gain asked the other adventurers if they'd ever killed anyone, and Tara is startled by the conversation. Seeing her reaction, Shin makes it clear to her that escort jobs are dangerous, and it's more likely to be attacked by bandits than monsters. Tsubaki adds that she's often underestimated because of her size, but she always gets the job done. With that said, Shin wants to know how each of them fights so they can strategize if something happens. Soon, Gain reveals he's a rank A samurai, useless with magic, but a beast unleashed with a katana. The girl, on the other hand, is a rank E fighter capable of casting support spells to increase speed. Tara reveals she's an alchemist, but also proficient with sword and bow. Just having joined the guild, she's still a rank G but can use simple healing spells. Lastly, Shin reveals he's also a samurai but rank E and can conjure fire and lightning spells. On his mind is Yuzuha, whom he presents as a respectable monster, both having a pact of domination. Gain finds it curious for a samurai to use magic, while Tsubaki wonders if the guy was born in Hinamoto, as most samurais are from there. In fact, most people are warriors, knights, or specialist occupations, so those who become samurais are usually more eccentric. Still, prerequisites to excel in this class are being a knight and berserker, so it's strange for someone to only mention being able to cast spells when asked about their talents. Nevertheless, Shin tries to convince the girl that he and Yuzuha are powerful, while Gain adds that Hinamoto is a unique island, home to several guild headquarters of samurais and ninjas. Since then, the nation has been built around these headquarters, making it a place that breathes ninja and samurai style. Among the most well-known guilds, there are Kacho Fugetsu, Maju Kaparoko, and Kuramiko Jinja. Hearing this, Shin is impressed that there's an entire country based on the game's guilds. Suddenly, the carriage is abruptly stopped, and outside, some bandits surround the adventurers and the merchant Nak. The criminals demand that the merchant hands over all the money and cargo, otherwise, everyone will die. Shin tells Nak to get inside the carriage and for Yuzuha to take care of him, while the adventurers deal with the enemies. Lurking behind the carriage, Tara remembers Gain asking if she had ever killed anyone before, so she steadies her pulse and realizes the time is now, or else people could be in danger. The leader of the bandits goes further and asks them to leave the redhead alive for him, while another claims he'll make the girl scream and cry because that's the only way he can get excited. Attentive to every word, Shin lets out a deep expression of hatred for those men, and Tyra becomes worried seeing her friend exude that aura of bloodlust again. Looking around, she notices more bandits hidden in the forest, and so she knows she can't hesitate now. Gain issues the first and only warning, sparing the criminals if they retreat, but the bandits have found out that the samurai was accompanied by several rank E or below, so while Gain may be rank A, he won't be able to fight and protect the others alone. With that said, the adventurers are confused about how the villains got information about them, but promise to extract the truth from them. On the other side, the bandits are eager to massacre the enemies and leave the redhead for last until an arrow grazes one of them and hits another bandit hidden in a tree. Then another arrow takes down another man, so the faction leader orders the gang to go after the adventurers. Tsubaki faces off against a sword rival and imagines the guy is definitely underestimating her, so she uses it to her advantage and employs the vertiginous vigor, a more powerful technique than someone of rank E should have, and sends the opponent flying with a punch to the stomach. Next, Gain cuts another opponent's sword with just one strike, and mysteriously, the man dies instantly. Gain knows the leader of the bandit's sword is magic, but he warns that his is too. In another corner, Shin handles the offensive of two enemies but dispatches them with ease. With no one left by his side, the gang leader questions who these adventurers are since he was sure only the Dragnir would be trouble. Without answering the man's question, Shin approaches and warns that first of all, he needs to take care of the opponent's magical sword. By breaking the man's weapon, the boy completes that now it's just a matter of immobilizing the enemy, who gives up his bravado and begs for his life. Inside, Nak asks if it's over, while the criminal maintains his threats to the group even subdued. Then Shin points his sword at him and asks where they got the information about the escort. However, suddenly, Tara pulls the guy away and gives him an affectionate hug, attempting to make him lose the malevolent aura and return to normal. As it works, she simply withdraws from there so as not to disrupt the continuity of the interrogation. Shin asks Tsubaki what just happened, but nobody has any idea. At the same time, Tara is embarrassed for having to do that, but she remembers her master doing the same thing when she wanted to calm the little elf down. Anyway, she has no idea how she's going to face that guy from now on. So after the attack they suffered, Gain explains that the bandits were looking for goods connected to the church, but they weren't informed of exactly what they should take. Tsubaki doesn't understand why they would accept a job without knowing what it entails, but Dragner adds that their role would be to kill everyone and take the whole cart, which horrifies the little girl. With that said, Shin recalls that the sisters needed official recognition from the church headquarters for the next priest to take over, so he considers that someone might be trying to prevent that. Either way, the boy acknowledges that escorting was the best possible choice, whether it was a coincidence or not that the orphanage matter ended up falling on this service. Upon arriving in Barian, Naji thanks the adventurers for the escort, so he hands them the completion certificates to deliver to the guild, counting on all of them in case a new escort is needed. After completing all the procedures and reporting the attack they suffered, Gain and Tsubaki will head to Vilmont, while Shin and Tira will head towards Farnid. Thus, the two groups bid farewell, and Shin wants to know how they will continue their journey. Considering that Farnid, for example, is quite far away, it would be interesting to consider having your own carriage. Thinking about it, he pushes his idea forward and goes to a shop to buy a carriage. But since they all look very similar, the adventurer decides to give the vehicle a touch of personality with some basic modifications, especially to reduce vibration and improve wheel movement. Tara was worried that the guy would want to pimp out the carriage, adding wings or some magical turbine, so she relaxes when she hears him say that his plan was simpler, making more discreet changes to the vehicle. After all, the idea is always not to attract too much attention. With that decided, they go for a carriage big enough for them to sleep in, to accommodate all the luggage they'll take on their travels, and to accommodate Shni when she returns. So they inform the buyer which of the carriages they will take when they leave the city, and the merchant asks if they have already arranged horses to pull it, preferably strong ones, because this is not the lightest carriage. Shin mentions rumors about people using monsters to do this job. The man confirms that this is indeed the case, and that it is much more effective, given the strength of the monsters, but the person needs to have the ability to tame the creature if they want it to perform this function without causing trouble or endangering people's lives. Confirming the information, Shin gets excited to figure out this case and arrange his own beast to pull the vehicle. As a last resort, he considers having Yuzuha carry the cart, which the fox doesn't seem to approve of very much. At that moment, the boy receives a telepathic call from Shni, saying that she has settled her affairs in the kingdom. Shin informs her that he bought a carriage in Baren and that they now need horses to head to Farnid. In this case, since she will arrive in Barium in a day, Shni offers to capture a monster on the way for this service. Besides that, she informs them that the castle is very concerned about the disappearance of the moon's sanctuary, but anyway, she thinks it's good for them to get used to this kind of thing because she doesn't want to be at the mercy of what they think or don't think, since they always flatter Shni to keep her on the kingdom's side, and she hates that with all her might. Shin imagines it must be difficult for the girl, especially since anyone would strive to recruit a woman of her caliber. Speaking of which, Shni heard that a nation wanted to claim the sanctuary for itself, and she seriously considered wiping out that entire kingdom for that reason. Many people have tried to dominate the elf in numerous ways, always trying to take her powers along with the moon's sanctuary, but so far she has managed to get rid of all these problems, especially with those who tried to marry her. Shin is suspicious to say since he himself configured her like that, but he acknowledges that the girl has an unusual beauty, which is why she is so desired. Shni comments that Shin is feeling jealous, and he confesses without hesitation, leaving the girl embarrassed. Finally, she asks them to let her know when they decide where they will stay until she arrives in Barian. With that said, she hangs up, and Tara seems delighted with some items she found in a small shop on the street, and Shin thinks it's a good idea to take a walk around before they settle somewhere. However, the shopkeeper asks if they are from out of town and suggests a good place for them to stay. In the late afternoon, they arrive at an extremely fancy place, and they already have an idea that it won't be cheap. When they arrive at the receptionist, the staff asks if the two will share a room, and they both answer in surprise that they want separate rooms. In the end, they end up spending almost half of the escort payment on this night's lodging, but Taira likes to think that sometimes they could afford this luxury. Speaking of luxury, that's exactly what Shin finds when he enters his room, and Yuzuha wastes no time lying on the bed and assuming her more human form to open her mouth. As for the boy, he takes the time he has until dinner to maintain his weapons. Sometime later, Taira enters the adventurer's room and asks if he informed her mistress where they are. He confirms that he did, and he thinks about having dinner with everyone in the room. After the meal, everyone is full, and Shin asks Yuzuha if she will turn into a fox during the night, but she doesn't respond. Taira says she's going to take a bath, and the elemental asks to go with her. The elf sees no problem with that, but the fox pulls her into Shin's room's bathroom instead of hers. With that done, Shin can now continue with the maintenance of his equipment until he hears the little girl commenting on how big and soft something of Taira's is. The elf asks the girl to let her go, but the fox can't resist the doing it makes. So to try to get that out of his head, the boy distracts himself a bit with the moon. Meanwhile, in the middle of the night, Shin encounters a gigantic beast and believes it'll do the job. The next day, Shin wakes up with Yuzuha on his face and understands why he can't breathe. He plans to work on the wagon until Shin arrives, starting with the axles, adding some springs to reduce the vibration, using a crafting ability to work metal. Taira is amazed at how quickly he does everything, so he decides to work on the wagon in a more conventional way to avoid drawing too much attention. At that moment, Shni announces her arrival in the city, being in the forest heading out through the north gate. So the boy gives up doing manual labor and resorts to magic to finish the job quickly and meet up with his friend. On the way, Yuzuha senses a strong presence ahead, and Taira becomes worried, but Shin tells her to chill. A little further ahead, they come face to face with a level 751 Jade Grufazio, and Shin comments that the usual maximum level for this beast is 650, but judging by its horn, this one is unique. As promised, Shini introduces the monster that will pull the wagon, and Shin questions where she found this giant creature. She replies that she found it on the sacred mountain, while the wolf sniffs Taira closely, leaving her frightened. She says that if they're going to haul the wagon, it would have to be some beast of the sacred beast class, but the wagon owner thinks this beast is a bit too much for the job. The elf imagined he would say something like that, so she asks the wolf to shrink in size and explains that he can shrink even more, which is very useful when they are in the city or staying somewhere. Still, Shin comments that he didn't expect a creature of such a high level to do this job, and Taira finds it strange that the master thinks it's normal for a sacred beast to pull a wagon. Saddened, Shini lowers her head and asks if they didn't like what she does, so the boy downplays it and changes his speech, saying it's cool to have a wolf like that. In the meantime, Yuzuha starts chatting with the Grufazio in their own language, and she confirms that the wolf is available for whatever they need. Shin finds it interesting that the two beasts can converse and then asks the wolf's name. Shini thought of Shimmering because he uses thunder and illusion abilities. Finally, they all set off with Shimmering pulling the carriage, heading towards Farnet in search of their old friend, Gerard. As they depart, the Grufazio takes off at a tremendous speed, shattering the idea of being discreet. Still, the adjustments Shin made make the vehicle not tremble, leaving them more comfortable than a real carriage, according to Shini. Meanwhile, Yuzuha talks about Shimmering's childhood and discovers that he and his mother ruled the sacred mountain together, but an adventurer defeated the mother and only the son survived. Having said that, Shin feels remorse for having done similar things in the game. Yuzuha adds that the Grufazio ran as fast as he could and was rescued by an elf. After that, he worked hard to get stronger and returned to the sacred mountain. In light of this, Shini understands why the beast wasn't so defensive with her, as an elf was responsible for rescuing Shimmering. In fact, the beast comments that it joined Shini because of the familiar scent she has, because it was Taira's scent. Everyone is amazed by this because it was indeed Taira who saved Shimmering. Then she remembers that she saved a puppy when she was a child, but she didn't know he was in front of her after all this time because it was over a century ago. Thus, the elf's master considers passing Shimmering's ownership to the servant. Then they stop to perform the procedure, and the first step is for Shni to break her pact with the creature. After completing this stage, Taira approaches to formalize her union with the Jade Grufazio, so she touches his snout and expresses her desire to walk beside him. This technique molds marks around the creature's body, sealing the union between the two, but Taira is somehow affected by it and almost faints. Shin grabs her before she falls, and it seems she has lost strength, but she'll be fine after resting. As night falls, the group camps, and Taira spends her first night sleeping with Shimmering and Yuzuha in her lap. Shin asks if Shni left the wolf with her servant to protect her, and she replies that she did, because soon Taira will choose her own path, and it will be great to have a Grufazio of that level helping her. Shin comments that the fact that Tyra can summon Shimmering whenever she wants is reassuring, and Shni takes the opportunity to comment that she would do the same for Shin. Then the boy touches his friend's hand as a gesture of thanks, saying that indeed it's always her he turns to when he's in trouble. Embarrassed, the elf responds that he can always count on her when he needs to. The next day, the team continues their journey, reaching the southeast of Farnan on the outskirts of the Ralua forest. A little ahead, two high-level individuals approach. Since Shini sent a message to Jurat informing him that they were coming, she assumes these are people coming to meet them. Indeed, the duo announces that they have come by order of the First King and will be responsible for taking the group to Jurat. Having said that, Shin stores the wagon and shrinks Shimmering to a smaller size, and on the way, Shini comments that these two are direct descendants of Jurat. Upon arrival, everyone is impressed by the beauty and tranquility around them, until the girl who went to fetch the group announces the arrival of the visitors. So they enter where Jurat is alongside an elephant and a humanoid turtle. Joyful, Jurat comments that he thought he would never see his master again in this life. Shen also thought the same, and Jurat understands the reason, since he himself doesn't know why he's still alive. So before anything else, he reveals that the man dressed in brown is Wolfgang, the current king of beasts, and his daughter, Kor. As for the other two, they are Jurat's confidants, his right-hand man Venku and his left-hand man Rajim Dolk. Finally, Shin introduces himself as a superior human, using gestures of reverence. Jurat comments that his friend doesn't need so much formality, especially since it would be good for the others present, so they don't get too tense. After all, the presence of a superior human can evoke that image of beings to be feared and revered. Remembering a day when Shin and Jurat fought together, the superior human asked how many monsters his friend had killed, and he replied that he had no idea, perhaps more than 1,000. Nonetheless, his master reminds him that the decisive moment will arrive soon, and the duo prepares for what's to come. Laughing together back in the present, the two have no idea how they survived that day. Speaking of what happened in the last 500 years, Shni told them that Jurat founded a nation, leaving the man irritated for not having bragged about it before. However, imagining how the guy is on these matters, the elf preferred to tell it all at once to avoid witnessing her friend's egocentric spectacle. Then she gets up to prepare some tea, and Jurat comments that his tales of heroism will have to wait. Therefore, he wants to hear about Shin's life, and after some conversation, the first celestial king understood why he couldn't find his master anywhere. Soon, Jurat opens up and confesses that he will die soon, probably within a month. A few weeks ago, he felt that something was wrong, and when Shni told him about Shin, he became sure. He feels that time has started to flow again for him, as if waiting for his master's return. That said, he turns to Shin and challenges the superior human to a duel. At the same time, Shin eavesdrops on the conversation from behind the wall, and Shin questions if the man wants to die in battle like a warrior. Without hesitation, Jurat reveals that yes, because his friend is the strongest warrior he knows, so he would like to see how his fangs would fare against such a powerful opponent. A little reluctant, Shin accepts the challenge, and Shni tries to hold back her tears as she leaves. Shin asks if everyone knows about the Celestial King's lifespan, and he explains that he has already told everyone, and will do the same regarding this duel, because he doesn't want to hide anything from anyone. That said, Jurat believes that Van and Rajin understood what he wanted, because they have all fought together since Shin disappeared. The two are of the longest-lived beast types, but the three are old now. Therefore, it is time for this nation to be freed from their influence. Shin comments that he heard that Wolfgang is an exceptional ruler, which Jurat agrees with, emphasizing how dedicated he is to the people, and therefore is a great successor to lead the territory. As night falls, Jurat gathers his faithful subordinates for a personal announcement. Finally, he reveals that he has found the place where he will die. Wolfgang asks what that means, so the Celestial King reminds him that he already said how much time he has left in this life, and for that reason, he invited Shin to a duel in 1 week, before he dies of natural causes. Even in the face of the news, his two arms remain calm, since they are extremely experienced, but the Yumkor questions how they can be so calm in the face of such a devastating revelation. Patiently, Jurat explains that he has lived a long life, where he has seen companions fall, their children die, and even cared for their grandchildren on their deathbeds. Taking all this into account, Jurat believes he has no more reasons to live, and adds that they will fight in the Ralua forest, this being the last and greatest battle of his life. So he wishes everyone to witness this moment. Meanwhile, Shin watches the stars and reflects alone on this duel, just when he finally managed to see Jurat again. Yuzuha approaches and asks the boy if everything is okay, and he says yes with his familiar smile on his face, until he looks back at the sky with the fox in his lap. Similarly, Jurat does the same as his master, remembering the regret he had when Shin disappeared. Although it's just one, it's a big regret. According to the Celestial King, the world was dull without the boy's presence, and he even gave up his wish, thinking it would never come true. For all this, he thanks his master. In the days that pass, Yuzuha woke Shin up with the gentleness of a mammoth, and every day they shared breakfast. After so much time apart, the friends make up for lost time by sharing their experiences and achievements. In this long period, they were separated, and as always, Shin impresses everyone with his vast capacity as a superior human. Finally, the blacksmith restores his companion's combat gauntlets to perfect condition, and the perfection of the weapon brings back old memories in the head of the experienced warrior, who thanks the young man for this great feat. Next, he remembers that tomorrow is the big day, and although it's none of his business, he would like to know if the boy would leave Shini behind if he finds a way to return to his world. So, remembering every moment spent with his great elf friend, Shin replies yes, surprising Gerard. The young man reveals that this is the reason he keeps fighting. Speaking of which, he would love it if there was a way to resolve everything at once for him and for the elf. Just like he thought when he was younger, that he could shape everything around him and get what he wants, which is a happy ending where everyone would be happy forever. Gerard chuckles and emphasizes how far they are from that dream, and then confesses that he's looking forward to tomorrow, a feeling that Shin also shares. As the day breaks for the grand occasion, Gerard stands ready, body and soul prepared for the duel. Upon arriving at the appointed location, Shin asks Shini to control any spells that stray from the fight area, and the elf assures them that they can fight without worry. In the meantime, Tira, Yuzuha, and Sparkle wish Shin good luck. On the other side, Wolfgang thanks the first Celestial King for his teachings, making it clear that he can entrust the kingdom and its people to him. Kor promises to become a warrior worthy of the lineage of the first king. With that said, Gerard and Shin embark on the fight, while Rajam Dok and Van Ku remark that it has been a long time since they've seen their king smile like this. Wolfgang then touches his daughter's shoulder and asks her to witness the first king fulfilling his wish. So to the duel arena, the two combatants declare the start of the battle, and the initial impact can be seen from afar by the onlookers who remain distant. Gerard comments on how heavy the opponent's blows continue to be, while Shin finds amusement in the adversary making such comments while receiving them as if they were nothing. Throughout the fight, they both feel a nostalgia for the old times when they shared a journey, while Wolfgang is impressed by the king's strength, as he didn't know he was capable of this. Shini observes that the warm-up must be ending, and Tyra finds it crazy that all this happening down there isn't even the real fight. She asks if the master is as strong as those two, and she admits that she would have a lot of difficulty in defeating Gerard. Attentive to details, Wolfgang wants to cherish this moment forever. Back to the fight, facing the initial damage, Gerard laments that the techniques he developed to fight against Shin are useless, but the opponent is sure that the Celestial King has some trick up his sleeve. Sure enough, the king transforms into a giant wolf, telling Shin that he knows how he feels. In their conversation last night, the boy is sure that he would fight with all his might, but he wouldn't use the titles he acquired by defeating the final boss because they're too overpowered. Hearing that, Gerard reflects that he would do the same if it were the other way around, but still he would love to fight Shin with his full strength. After all, this is the only opportunity he will have in the little life left for him, and the wolf doesn't want to waste it. Thus, Gerard goes all out against the opponent, who retaliates with magic. The Celestial King dodges with unbelievable speed, appearing behind Shin and attacking him with his claws. The human narrowly avoids being torn apart by the blow, but manages to distance himself from the beast for a moment. Soon, Gerard announces his ultimate technique, the legendary Excellence, a massive energy mass that drags Shin along with his sword for miles through the forest. Even with the distance, the wolf reaches the opponent in the blink of an eye and attacks again, this time with the 8 flowers palm and the twin flying springs. Defending himself as best he can, Shin reflects that Gerard is chaining different abilities and can't imagine how long it took him to develop all these techniques with such perfection. Then, dodging the last blow, Shin confesses to himself that he wasn't fighting at full strength, so he internally apologizes to his friend and begins to unleash all his power. Gerard shouts that this is the spirit, and then the two launch abilities simultaneously, which explode into each other with an absurd impact, leaving Kor increasingly anxious. In the battlefield, Gerard insists on the ability and ends up breaking the opponent's sword, leaving him vulnerable to a blow. However, when he was about to hit Shin, the wolf suffers from an unexpected reaction that makes him spit blood. Returning to his human form, he observes that this is his end, while Shin is impressed by having almost been hit. For reasons like this, the Celestial King believes he has lived his 500 years well to come to a fight against a celestial human and be able to hit him in some way. Finally, his wish was fulfilled. As a reward for hitting Shin once, Gerard asks a favor from his friend as compensation. First, he assures he is happy to fight Shin with full force, but deep down, he believes there was something beyond that. So Shin says nothing, then moves away and emanates such an absurd amount of mana that none of the people present had any idea that such magnitude was possible. Seeing that energy anomaly, Gerard realizes that the boy is indeed incomparable, and then he bids farewell to his friend. With that said, Shin does the same, while spreading his mana to the point of taking Gerard's life. With the end of the fight, Shin returns to his friends carrying the body of the first Celestial King, and Gerard's subordinates rush to be by their master's side. Shin asks everyone to hold their heads high because Gerard managed to hit him, a superior human, which means he ascended to the level of these extraordinary beings. Finally, Van Ku makes sure that everyone contemplates the satisfied face of the king, then Kor realizes that the ruler would be laughing at them if he knew they were crying because of him. Later, in a heavy rain, the Beast People accompany the burial of the first Celestial King, one who unified the peoples of the region and provided peace for its inhabitants. As a sign of respect, the wolves howl as Gerard's coffin is carried to the top of a mountain. After the burial, Shni gives Shin a tight hug after having a strange feeling that he would disappear from there to somewhere. For this reason, she assures she would do whatever she can if Shin needs anything. Shin knew it was Gerard's wish for this fight to happen, but at the same time, it hurts a lot to see a friend go. Shin agrees and says it's okay to feel sad at this moment.
One day later, the group walks through the city and Shin notices that the two girls have cat ears. According to them, elves attract a lot of attention, so they disguise themselves as beasts to blend in. By the way, Shni asks the boy what he thought of her with those ears, and he confesses that it suited her very well. With that said, the elf continues walking, while Tiara comments that she has never seen her master behave like this. Shin agrees at the same time, not expecting to encounter Shueida superior Dragnir, who was his support character in the past. At Gerard's funeral, it was this Dragnir who represented Kilmont, an allied nation of Farnet. Upon reaching their destination, Shin questions Shni if Shueid became a monarch like Gerard. The elf tells him no. Although he was the first emperor of the Dragon Empire Kilmont, he cut ties with the imperial family and has since lived free from the constraints of nobility. The second and current emperor was originally supposed to be the first, but was injured during the founding of the nation, so Shueid was like a substitute. Speaking of which, Wolfgang asks everyone to sit down while he summons the Dragnir, leaving Kor on standby in case anyone needs anything. Next, the former leader of Kilmont introduces himself and bows before his old master Shin, happy with the return of the one he served for much of his life. Shueid affirms that he will resume the same role, being the spear that pierces Shin's enemies. The boy had forgotten that this was the dragon's personality, so he warns, as he did with Shni, that he doesn't need to be treated as an absolute master or anything like that. In this case, Shueid realizes that things have changed and promises to adjust his treatment. By the way, he asks about Shni's ears and tail, and she affirms that she's catering to Shin's taste, forcing the boy to ask the elf not to say things that could be misinterpreted. Soon they tell the Dragnir the whole story of what happened to Gerard, about how he died satisfied and feeling honored. Shueid is proud that his late friend lived his life to the fullest, and picking up on the thread, he asks Shin what his next step will be. Shin states that he researched in the library and found out where the sacred place is, which is where he will go next. Shueid says he needs to pass through Kilmont first, but asks to join his old master, staying in contact with him via telepathy until he returns. Before leaving, Shin summons the Dragnir's old weapon Najizuki. Moved, the dragon grasps the halberd and remarks that it has been a long time since he held it, yet nothing seems more natural in his hands than this weapon. Still, he notices that Najizuki seems more powerful than when he knew it, so Shin explains that he improved the halberd by 50% after learning to better control his mana by tinkering with Gerard's weapon. Later, the group goes to the Adventurers Guild because Shin wants to raise his level to at least rank C. To do this, he takes on a job to kill goblins. Excited, Kor asks to join the mission, putting off the investigation of the Ralua forest where Shin fought before. She is tasked with ensuring that the forest is regrowing properly, and Shin asks to closely monitor the case when they return, since he participated in the destruction of the area. Soon they all set off for work and find a team of 4 goblins within the forest, one for each of them. Catching the enemies by surprise, Shin takes down the first with his kunais, as does Shni. Kor takes out the third and fourth with her bow and arrow, leaving Tiara with none, but still maintaining a victorious pose. After the simple job, they all return to the Ralua forest, the stage of the epic battle between Shin and Gerard on on the day of the death of Farnid's first celestial king. The area seemed to have regenerated without problems, but Quor insists on conducting a deeper investigation into the trees to see if there is anything unnatural among them, such as unusual herbs that could hinder the forest's growth. Later, the group leader submits proof of the job's completion to the guild until the receptionist hands a message to the boy. It was from Barlux, the guild master of the Berilich branch. Shin was summoned to appear at the kingdom's palace and must do so as soon as possible. The girls question if he has any idea what this call is about, so Shin recalls the day he defeated a skull-faced Jack and made his sword run rampant uncontrollably. With that said, Quor regrets not being able to accompany this expedition since she doesn't have permission to leave the beast country. Thus, Shin asks the girl to inform him when Wolfgang is available because he wants to deliver something to her father. Without delay, as night falls, Shin meets with Wolfgang again and informs him that he needs to leave for Berilich soon. Therefore, he hands over Gerardt's gauntlets called the Moons of Death. The property is in Wolfgang's name, but he can change it to whomever he wishes. The man heard that these gloves were destroyed in the duel, but since it was the blacksmith himself who created them, he was able to repair them. Moreover, it was Gerardt who asked for the weapon to be delivered to Wolfgang. Honored by the gift from the first king, he tests the gauntlets and is amazed by the power emanating from them. After spending the night at Wolfgang and Quor's house, the group sets off for the continuation of the journey, where they must return to the right place at the Moon Sanctuary via teleportation. In a matter of seconds, they arrive at the desired location, but Shin identifies beings watching their arrival. Schnee considers that they might be waiting for the Moon Sanctuary's return, although most people have forgotten that the sanctuary can be carried. Just as the sanctuary can disappear, the elf asks if Shin plans to have the same fate, but quickly pretends it was nothing when the boy realizes what she said. Upon seeing his friend walking away, he confesses to Tierra that he can't imagine what it's like to wait for someone you're not sure will come back. Tierra is certain he doesn't, but she still recalls that the perception of time between humans and elves is quite different. For species that live as long as hers, losing purpose can be the gateway to hell, so it's important to keep a goal in mind to live for. In Schnee's case, her incentive was to wait for her master's return. Sometime later, they return to the Berilich Guild and Shin informs about the summon from the Barlux, so Silica stands up to call the local master. The adventurer asks Celica if she knows what this call is about, but she emphasizes that this kind of thing is never passed on to receptionists, although she already expected Shin to be summoned because visibly the boy is not a common adventurer, and soon people would see usefulness in him frequently. While Shin agrees with all the sadness in the world, Celica mentions that he also always travels accompanied only by beautiful women. Faced with the friends not knowing where to put their faces, Shin makes it clear that he also has many male friends, but the receptionist insists that she has never seen him talking to one. Desperate to prove that she has, the boy mentions Wilhelm, who has indeed worked with him before, so all the adventurers around look at him with displeasure upon hearing this. Celica asks if this is true and Shin confirms it, although it wasn't an official service. Anyway, the boy wants to know why everyone was staring at him like that, so the woman explains that rarely does Wilhelm Avis join anyone, and that everyone knows him as an S rank, but few actually know anything about that warrior. Soon, Silica calls the summoned one to meet with the local guild master. In the meeting room, Barlux introduces Erod Royal, a wizard skilled in evaluating gemstones for the guild. In fact, he was the one who analyzed the Skullface's stone that Shin brought. The wizard mentions the sword that was thrown and hit the second princess of Berilich's room, Rian, because this event caused a great confusion in the kingdom, although no one was harmed. The problem is the sword itself. Its elemental enchantment and base materials are extremely potent, comparable to the royal sword. Moreover, the Skullface's stone also shows powerful mana, which means that the bearer of this item was very strong. Embarrassed, Shin already knows that they found out his involvement in this, but still asks why they think so. Erod comments that an investigation was made to find the responsible one, and traces of a different mana than the monster's sword were found. Since Shin delivered the stone, nothing is more obvious than summoning the adventurer for questioning, and no one less than the second princess herself wants to see Shin personally, because she herself has hunted many Skullfaces and is interested in this matter like no one else. That said, Barlux doesn't know exactly what Rian wants with the young man, after all, as Erod Royal reminds, politicians are unscrupulous beings. So Shin returns to the inn where the group stayed and updates updates the friends on the situation. Faced with the fact Shni believes that the kingdom wants Shin to serve them or else to marry some important noblewoman, since the power of a nation is based on those chosen to be in the upper echelon. Seeing that Shin didn't like this idea, the elf says he can pretend she's his bride before the royalty. Likewise, he can also pretend to be married to Tiara. She doesn't think there's anything wrong with that as long as it's just pretend. Finally, Yuzua appears and says she also wants to be Shin's bride, making the boy despair at the thought of his reputation being destroyed instantly. Rejected, the fox questions if the boy will mate with Shni, leaving him in an even worse situation. When dawn breaks again, the guest presents himself at the palace gate, so the guard goes to fetch the one responsible for guiding the young man. Within a time, Gadras, the second princess's right-hand man, approaches the visitor to fulfill his role. Shin analyzes the knight and discovers that he is level 188, one of the most powerful men in the kingdom, coming to receive a boy like him at the palace gate. Soon he is placed before the noble and feels intimidated by her presence. She introduces herself as Rion Berilich. As she's not a fan of etiquette rules, she insists on being called by her first name. Gadras mentions that it's not appropriate to open this space for someone she just met, but the princess replies that she will fight alongside this young man at some point, so she doesn't want there to be a barrier between them. Still, the boy is curious to know the reason for his summons and doesn't fail to question it, so Berilich opens a chest where the famous Skullface's sword was stored. When she comments that Shin must have had trouble defeating a monster of this caliber, he decides not to lie, but without revealing his real strength. So he states that the fight was so intense that even his own weapon was destroyed in combat. That said, Rion claims to be happy to have confirmed her suspicions. After all, she was sure that Shin was a differentiating adventurer known as one of the chosen. Upon meeting an individual with this talent, usually the court invites the person to the palace. On the other hand, some nobles use this piece as a herald of war, although the princess doesn't believe that Shin is of that type. In fact, the boy doesn't understand how his actions could lead someone to even consider that. Be that as it may, Rion Berilich possesses the intuition ability, making her hunches simply accurate. In other words, she's never wrong. Besides that, Gadras mentions that the recommendation letter from the Moon Sanctuary was the deciding factor in dispelling suspicions about the boy, because everyone in the kingdom trusts Shni's criterion for choosing their envoys. That said, the princess concludes this matter and goes straight to the point, calling Shin for a duel against her. At the same time, a man is attacked inside the palace by a strange shadow. Back in the princess's chamber, Gadras disapproves of her invitation to duel, stating that they need to discuss the boy's entry into the kingdom first. Rion responds that it would be better to test his skills first, but the warrior insists there are better ways to address the issue. Moreover, it's not fitting for a princess to challenge someone to a fight in such a manner. Rion leaves the etiquette rules to her soft-hearted sister and prefers to handle the fighting part, so she promptly calls the guest to battle, ignoring her loyal right-hand Gadras, who is comforted by Shin himself. For the duel to be taken to its limits without anyone needing to hold back, the princess teleports Shin and Gadras to the most suitable location, an arena that was once a training ground built for battles between the chosen ones. At least the kingdom sees no other purpose this place could have had, so they believe in this hypothesis. As another example, teleportation points are technology from before the decline of glory, so there are things involved there that they still cannot fully comprehend. Hearing this, Shin reflects that he always found it strange that the kingdom uses teleportation points even though it's a lost magic. Soon Rion asks the challenger to choose any weapon he wants, and he draws a sword. The woman chooses the same type of weapon but 10 times larger. Before the confrontation begins, Rion warns that the goal is to test the guest's skills, and he should show what he knows. Then the fight begins, with the Berilich officer demonstrating great skill in direct combat. Attempting to surprise her opponent, she drops her sword in the middle of the fight, almost hitting him with a kick. Despite Shin being distracted, he managed to dodge the blow just in time, so Rion promises that things will be different on the next attempt. To fight against a chosen one with hand-to-hand combat expertise, the boy adjusts his stats to counter the opponent's characteristics and soon attacks again. As they cross swords again, Rion questions if he really wants to measure strength with her, her, and the young man assures that his arms aren't as weak as they seem. Besides, the princess reminds the boy that he can use his abilities because she doesn't want him to hold back. Thus, he uses the vertiginous vigor, and soon after his rival imitates the technique. Gadras observes that the two are almost equally matched in terms of enhancement, and this fight will surely be decided by a detail. Rion advances and delivers a blow that causes a chain fire reaction, and Shin knows that if he hadn't dodged, he'd be a dead man. Later, the princess analyzes that the two have similar fighting styles with well-matched reaction speeds. Shin understands this as well, so he wants the fight to end since it won't be over anytime soon. Moreover, he comments that Rion's sword is almost at its limit, pausing to think she sees that indeed the weapon isn't withstanding her strength as expected. Gadras intervenes and points out that the guest's strength is indeed similar to Her Highness's, and what has been shown so far is enough for a skill assessment. With that said, Rion doesn't want to force the opponent to fight, so she ends the duel, relieving the other two present. Meanwhile, someone tries to enter the teleportation room and is stopped by two guards. Rion formally invites Shin to serve the kingdom, but he declines the offer. The woman emphasizes that she can guarantee a high rank for the boy, but he replies that numerous responsibilities will come as a package deal, and that's what he wants to avoid because his desire is to maintain a free life as an adventurer. With that said, Rion Barilich understands well, but asks the boy to inform her if he changes his mind. Then Shin asks why the princess brought the Skullface sword to the duel since it wasn't even used, so she explains that in this kingdom, it is customary for a man to give a sword to a woman when proposing marriage, and if the man were unfaithful, the sword should be used to eliminate the traitor. Shin finds this tradition somewhat disturbing, and the woman responds that nowadays it's just a formality, but she would still like to interpret this sword that fell into her room as a gift. Shin asks if that means he proposed to Rion, to which she confirms. Then he explains that it was just an accident, but the princess has no intention of insisting on the matter. Gadras mentions that there are people conspiring to take advantage of this incident and imprison Shin as a criminal, forcing him to serve the kingdom in compensation. Because of this, the princess wants to see the sword as a gift, otherwise this event could be considered a crime since someone could have died with that flying blade. With that said, taking the opportunity to get the kingdom off his back, Shin leaves the sword with Rion as a gift in exchange for access to restricted areas of the magic library. Rion argues that the boy could ask for much more because just that sword would be enough for him to live as he pleases for the rest of his life. But Shin is only interested in living his simple life, besides access to the library being of great value to him. Thus, the two make a deal. Upon returning to the kingdom, they see the guards fallen at the door, with Cardinal Greril inside the teleportation room being a victim of spells like confusion and seduction. Gadras tries to interrupt the procedure the cardinal was performing, but it was too late, so Rion and Shin are teleported to another place, leaving the kingdom's warrior alone. Arriving there, the two try to understand where they ended up, and the princess believes these ruins are from the sacred land of Kalkia. Besides, she analyzes that for someone as powerful as Cardinal Greril to lose his mind, a great force would be necessary. Be that as it may, Shin emphasizes that they need to leave soon, so he asks if the princess has telepathy. She doesn't, since she's not in any group, so the adventurer contacts his team to set a meeting point. For this, he needs to know if there's any nearby city, and Rion says there's the walled city of Valmer where they would pass going to or from Barilich. Upon learning this, Shin contacts Shni, who startles the young man by showing her desperate concern for not knowing where he is. Shin tries to calm his friend by explaining the situation. After learning everything, the elf comments that abilities affecting the mind like the one the cardinal suffered are a major taboo, and even royalty can be condemned to execution if caught using them. For this reason, it's concerning that someone is loose in the kingdom practicing this kind of spell. Knowing this, Shin comments that he won't be able to return using his teleportation as it's a forbidden magic, which would certainly make the princess and others prevent him from leaving the kingdom. Thus, the adventurer wants Shni to handle the situation, given she is part of Barilich's forces. When she confirms she'll resolve the problem, Shin informs everyone to meet in Valmer and ends the telepathy. Consequently, Shni tells Tierra that they must head to the palace. On the way, the elven master comments to her servant that Shin is in big trouble, likely because a demon is after him. Demons are creatures created by miasma, and the difference between them and other monsters is that they are strengthened within this miasma, and can disguise themselves as other monsters. Creatures affected by miasma attack anything around them indiscriminately, and the more humanoid a demon is, the more powerful and intelligent it is. They are divided into 7 categories that represent their strength from Viscount to Grand Duke, the highest rank. Considering this demon managed to control a cardinal, it probably belongs to the Count level. Despite being an intermediate category, this entity must be between level 300 and 400, which is quite significant. After saying this and guiding Tiara to the castle walls, Schnee uses a concealment spell to make her and her servant invisible to stealthily enter the palace. She then holds Tiara in her arms and flies over the wall. Inside the castle, Schnee's destination is the dungeon, and upon entering, she observes that the demon has already been imprisoned, leaving Tiara even more confused. First, Schnee puts the guards to sleep and takes the key to open the cell where Cardinal Greril is held. Upon entering and addressing the cleric, he says he remembers nothing being cast on him, no matter how hard he tries to recall. Schnee Razor reassures the clergyman by ensuring the 2 teleported individuals are safe and removes the status effects on him. However, when casting her healing magic on the cardinal, Schnee manages to reveal the demon behind the cleric's facade. It was Magnamuk level 423. Magnamuk notices the superior elf with silver hair and blue eyes in front of him, realizing it's Schnee Razor, who always disrupts the demon's plans. The elf comments that it has been 500 years since she last saw this type of monster, since the time of the Cataclysm, but they are still as ugly as ever. To remove this huge thorn in his side, the monster attacks his enemy, who manages to defend herself, effortlessly cutting off the tentacles the demon throws at her, causing him immense pain. Incredulous Magnamuk questions why Schnee is helping the human, and she responds that it's not fair to let him die from false accusations. Besides, it would be disastrous for the Sanctuary of the Moon to let this demon act freely. As his tentacles regrow, Magnamuk recalls that it's in this sanctuary where the superior human used to be, and that this human defeated many demons in his journey. However, all of that is in the past, because the era of man is ending, with many warriors having departed from this world, causing a great division among those who remain, and consequently terrible corruption spreading like a disease. For this reason, Magnamuk invites Schnee to join the demons, especially since she was abandoned by her master. The elf admits she would have been furious hearing this in any other situation, but she has learned not to fight with her emotions. With that said, it's a terrible moment for Magnamuk to appear. She then conjures the blue moon sword and cuts the demon as if he were paper. Seeing Schnee Razor striding through the castle corridors, the soldiers are in awe of the legend she is, and Tiara starts to understand her master's significance to the kingdom of Berilich. Soon the group reaches the king, and also Gadras, informing them of the presence of a demon that possessed Cardinal Greril. Since demons are ancient enemies of humans, but haven't been seen in a long time, many people came to view them as legends, and their return causes great shock among the kingdom's members. The first princess hopes to use her magic to resist them, but isn't very confident about it. Still, not all the news is bad, as Schnee reveals that the 2 who were teleported, including the second princess, are safe. The cardinal apologizes for what he caused, but the king absolves the man of blame, noting he was enchanted, and hopes Greril continues to serve as an important church member. With that, Schnee emphasizes the importance of controlling information about the demonic presence to avoid spreading panic in the kingdom, and lastly, she bids farewell to continue her path. On the way out, Tiara asks their next destination, and her master informs they are heading to Valmer to meet Shin. The servant wonders how they will travel since the carriage is with the leader, so Schnee explains they will run, further confusing Tiara. Subsequently, the people of Berilich see a group kicking up dust as they speed through the city on foot. Terrified, Tiara tries to balance on Scintillante with difficulty, but Schnee urges Grufazio Jade to pick up the pace to reach the walled city quickly. At the same time, trapped in that distant place, Shin asks Rion if she knows anything about the Sacred Land. She explains that sacred lands are cities that fell during the decline of glory, and several chosen ones are needed to defeat the monsters that appear in such places. To fight enemies of this caliber, Rion was teleported with the Skullface sword, which helps a lot. Speaking of which, she worries if the young man will be okay, but he assures her he will be, despite not being able to explain why, since he doesn't want to be pressured pressured to join the kingdom if they find out how powerful he is. The problem is that it will be almost impossible to get out of there without using a good part of his strength. According to Rion, the sacred land Kalkia has gates at the 4 cardinal points. When her people scouted this place, they entered through the south gate, and next to the main gate there was a small door. Behind it, there must be some device to open and close the large gate. To quickly reach the south gate, Shin jumps over the city walls, but is thrown back as if he had never even left the place. After trying again and the cycle repeating, the adventurer tries through a hole in the wall and manages to discover why he was instantly thrown back. So he calls the princess to accompany him. And as they walk a bit further, they encounter a ball of light. According to Shin, if it's like the game, if there's one of these here, then this city must be a dungeon where you can only reach the exit by following a set route. If they stray from the route as Shin did earlier, they'll be returned immediately. So to escape, they must follow these spheres and defeat the monsters that appear until they reach the exit. Hearing this, Rion is glad to have been teleported with Shin because the boy truly has a talent for solving any kind of situation. When Shin acknowledges that he too is happy to be in the company of the princess, she can't help but blush. Then the boy offers to be teleported to the next stage by the sphere and assures her he will return to let her know the path is clear. In a few seconds, he fulfills his promise because without being watched, he can defeat all the monsters in the perimeter without having to hold back. With the next stage secure, Shin teleports the monarch with him and detects nearby enemies on the radar. Turning the corner, they come face to face with a ghost-type monster known as Gillyways, a level 531 ghost-type monster that uses earth and wind magic. Right away, the creature invokes a powerful tornado spell that frightens the princess, but Shin reassures her and says he'll take care of it. First, he asks her to try to land a hit on the enemy while he conjures his sword and dispels the tornado with it. Once that's done, Rion attacks with the flame edges and tears the ghost in half, and Shin delivers the finishing blow with the burning ashes ability. Rion finds it curious that it was so easy, so the boy explains that the Skullface sword is enchanted with the light element, which has a great advantage against opponents of that type. Speaking of which, the princess asks about the boy's sword, and he says it's called Kakira, a mid-level mythical sword. She comments that he was hiding his skills, to which he replies that it's important to keep a card or 2 up one's sleeve, although he has far more than 2. Continuing the walk, Shin detects more than 20 monsters in the surroundings and notes that they usually don't leave their territory within a dungeon, but still it's not wise to let their guard down. Reflecting alone, Shin would love to leave this place without further problems, but he always needs to measure his strength, which is extremely frustrating. Later, they find another sphere, but a level 684 Gilsly monster was in the way. Although Shin warns that it's a dangerous enemy, the princess doesn't believe that a mere slime can cause so much trouble and charges at it. When she hits the creature's body, it absorbs the impact as if it were nothing, then traps Rion with its tentacles, which start burning her body. Shin intervenes with the sand explosion, which makes the slime release his companion. In the boy's arms, she admits that she was careless and promises to think twice before advancing against an opponent in the sacred land. Shin explains that this slime is immune to blunt force cuts and weak attacks, so he uses a fire explosion. Exposing the monster's core, he signals Rion to attack, which she does, precisely defeating the Gilsly. After the final blow, the woman doesn't understand why the boy has his back turned to her, so he warns her that some parts of her clothes were burned during the fight. Embarrassed, the girl tries not to show anything, so Shin covers her with a coat. She asks if he saw anything, but even though he confirms he didn't, she doesn't believe him. Anyway, the boy helped her dress again, as he is always prepared for anything, and had clothes for the monarch, even some female garments that according to him were given by a friend. Despite the great help, the princess confesses that she would like a looser blouse, because that one is squeezing her front quite a bit. To assess the situation, Shin takes an innocent look at the girl's front, but soon realizes he wasn't as discreet as he wanted to be. Continuing their journey, he asks if Rion knows how to use any magical abilities, and she says she can cast beginner-level spells, certainly useless against sacred land monsters. With that said, Shin communicates with Shni and asks if it's okay for him to teach the princess a pseudo-enchantment. Under normal conditions, the elf would say no, but given the urgency, she sees no problem as it can be used for her self-defense. With permission granted, the adventurer gives the necessary instructions for the princess to perform the procedure correctly. By doing so, she manages to enchant her sword with a fake fire enchantment, providing a magic capable of destroying any weapon that is not at least legendary level, which will be very useful. With this additional benefit in her favor, the princess feels bad for being part of the royalty and not contributing anything significant to the situation. So to calm the noble, the boy makes a request to her in exchange for all he has offered so she doesn't feel useless. In this case, he wants her to protect her kingdom and her people, and that's all he desires. Rion is moved by the young man's heroic and kind speech, but in truth, he just wanted to divert the conversation away from the pseudo-enchantment, which is an overpowered hidden skill in the game. As they continue walking, nearing the southern gate, Shin experiences a strange sensation of being pulled, leading him to believe something within the sacred land is drawing him in. Regardless, he has no choice but to move forward. At the gate, he initially thought it was a monster egg, but Rion explains that if it were, the environment would be distorted by the mana concentration around the egg, which isn't the case here. According to her, she had never seen such a strange sphere. Although it does resemble an egg. It resembles an egg so much that it starts to crack like one releasing an ice griffin from within. Worried upon recognizing the enemy's characteristics, Shin grabs Rion in his arms to escape the freezing attacks of the beast, which violently hits everything in their path. Finding a somewhat safe spot, Shin devises a strategy to defeat the griffin where he would act as bait while Rion attacks from behind. With the plan set, the boy risks himself in front of the animal, insulting its pride by calling it a chicken popsicle. Enraged, the griffin focuses solely on attacking him, giving the second princess of Bairelich the necessary space to do her job. Using his trick throw, Shin manages to injure the enemy, causing it to writhe in pain. This was the opening Rion needed to attack from behind with her tyrant blows. Despite the strategy working, the griffin strikes the warrior with its wing, prompting Shin to continue the offensive this time, nullifying the opponent's ice with flame explosion. This move makes the two humans believe they have won the fight, but the creature regenerates and resumes its resistance. Faced with this, the duo evades the subsequent attacks while contemplating a way to kill this gigantic beast. After considering a plan, Shin asks Rion to find the device to open the gate alone, taking advantage of him distracting the enemy by attacking it head-on. Given the griffin's unusual regeneration, the boy believes it to be a magically created monster. If this is correct, there is a spell source fueling this griffin and allowing it to heal itself. Perhaps this same source is responsible for manipulating the gate mechanism, making it crucial to find it, as it would kill two birds with one stone. Explaining the plan and returning to the griffin, Shin internally regrets assigning the princess to this task. According to him, it doesn't really matter if there is a spell behind all of this. In truth, he wanted to be alone to attack without restrictions, so he deactivates his limit to cut off the griffin's head with one strike. As the creature regenerates, Shin is pleased to have found a good test subject to discover how much he can safely unleash his power. Sometime later, in another part of the city, Rion finally finds the door she was looking for, while Shin has already defeated the griffin 30 times, but each time it keeps coming back. Since it doesn't suffer physical or magical damage, the adventurer plans to seal it. Suddenly, a white sphere appears in front of the griffin's body, imposing the same sensation of being pulled on the boy. To end the fight, Shin attacks with a fire strike, but the sphere absorbs the magic. After that, he is enveloped by a golden aura, nullifying the attraction sensation. Freed, he strikes and knocks down the opponent's ice wing, which stops regenerating. Realizing this, Shin rubs his hands together and unleashes another flame attack, exploding the griffin and declaring his victory. Even so, he has no idea where such a monster came from, and that's concerning. Soon after, Rion approaches, and the two continue their journey until they reach the door where they can say goodbye to the dungeon. The next step is to find the rest of the group in Valmer, east of the Melt Mountains. Shortly after, Schnee is informed by the master that he has left the sacred land of Kalkia, so she calls her friends to depart this time. Even faster news that didn't make Tiara very happy, being on the back of the Shining One. While camping with Rion, Shin asks the princess to sleep because he will take the first watch. To endure the sleepless night, the boy prepares some tea, and Rion reiterates that the kingdom truly needs someone as prepared as he is. However, despite the second princess's excessive insistence, Shin doesn't fall for her charms and firmly firmly maintains his stance on not joining the Barilage army. Admiring the boy's spontaneity in talking to her, Rion admits she prefers the presence of such people because she is used to being flattered and having her wishes fulfilled by whoever is around. Moreover, her family is no longer as united as before, and this makes her miss having intimacy with someone. Having said that, she wraps herself in the boy's arms, who worries about someone from the castle seeing this. But as Rion makes it clear that she hasn't been watched for a long time, Shin accepts it without fuss. Feeling comfortable, the princess emphasizes that the adventurer is warm, and in response to the boy's innocence, she clarifies that she isn't talking about his body temperature. The next morning, they find a gigantic horde of monsters heading towards Valmar.